They say she has it all, the smile, the patience, the grace, but if you listen closely, not to her words but to the silence between them, you'll hear something else. A fracture, a quiet rebellion, a question no one wants her to ask, because if she does, if she dares to speak it aloud, everything around her begins to tremble. What if the woman you see is only a shadow of the one buried underneath? What if the truth about her life, her pain, her power, is something the world isn't ready to hear, something it's spent centuries trying to silence? And yet it rises. The split between the persona and the true self is a silent drama played out in the inner world of many women. From a young age, a woman is taught, not always through direct instruction, but through subtle cues, expectations, and cultural reinforcements, that there is a particular way she must appear in order to be accepted. This way of appearing is the persona, a mask worn to navigate the social world. It is shaped by what others value: politeness, beauty, nurturing tendencies, self-sacrifice, quietness. These traits become the costume, the expected script, and eventually a second skin. However, beneath this cultivated identity lies the true self, the complex, multifaceted psychological reality of the individual, which is often neglected, dismissed, or even unknown to the woman herself. The persona can serve a function. It allows for social cohesion and adaptability, but when it becomes dominant, the true self begins to fade into the background. This is particularly brutal in the lives of women, because their persona is not just about behavior, but about emotional availability, physical appearance, and even self-denial. A woman learns to smile when she does not feel joy, to care when she feels empty, to suppress anger in the name of grace, and to shrink her desires so they do not appear threatening. Over time, she forgets what she truly wants or who she truly is. The mask becomes her identity, and the deeper, instinctual, genuine self is left unexpressed. This division creates an ongoing psychic conflict. The persona receives approval and love, but only when the mask is intact. The real self remains unloved, unacknowledged, and sometimes even despised, because it contains elements that do not align with society's image of the ideal woman. For example, a woman might feel deep rage at the injustice she experiences, but her world only rewards her silence. Tomorrow, she may have visionary ideas and creative instincts, but is taught to be modest and humble, never too ambitious. This rejection of the authentic self leads to a sense of emptiness or numbness, a subtle grief, hard to name because it is a mourning of the self that never had the chance to live. The danger lies in the prolonged suppression of the true self. When a woman cannot reconcile the conflict between who she is and who she is expected to be, she may fall into depression, anxiety, or chronic dissatisfaction. These are not simply disorders. They are often the cries of the soul, signaling a life lived too far from the center of one's truth. And yet, instead of listening to these cries, society encourages further masking, telling women to be more productive, more beautiful, more giving. The outer performance is perfected, while the inner self withers. For many women, the path back to authenticity is long and painful because it means risking rejection. It means confronting the fact that the love they received was conditional on a mask. It means choosing to value the inner world over external validation. A radical act in a culture obsessed with surfaces. It means uncovering a voice that has been silenced and learning to trust it again. This process can feel like betrayal, not of others, but of the false self they have spent years building. Yet the alternative is to remain lost in the performance, forever seeking approval for a version of themselves that never existed in truth. The shadow is the part of the psyche that contains everything we are taught to reject: fear, or deny, traits that do not align with our conscious self-image. For women, shadow suppression is particularly intense and socially reinforced. The traits deemed unacceptable are not limited to those that are morally wrong or destructive, but include powerful and vital parts of the self: ambition, assertiveness, sexuality, competitiveness, rage, even profound intelligence. These aspects, though deeply human, are often labeled as unfeminine, too much, or dangerous in women. As a result, they are cast into the unconscious, repressed and disowned, becoming part of the personal shadow. This disowning does not erase these elements, it buries them alive, where they fester, distort, and leak out in unintended ways. When a woman internalizes these judgments, she does not simply become more acceptable to others, she fractures internally. She begins to feel shame for emotions that are natural, and she learns to distrust her own instincts. Anger becomes a source of guilt, not empowerment. Sexual desire becomes associated with danger or loss of self-worth. Assertiveness becomes linked to rejection. Over time, the woman becomes afraid of her own inner life, believing that her darker impulses must be kept hidden at all costs. She may tell herself that she is not like those women, the loud, the bold, the unapologetic, and in doing so, strengthens the split within her own psyche. This suppression is not merely personal, it is archetypal. The collective feminine shadow carries the weight of centuries of silencing. Women who displayed too much independence or knowledge were once burned as witches, exiled as outcasts, or labeled hysterical. Even in the modern world, these ancient echoes persist. A woman who dares to take up space, speak too honestly, or pursue power may not face literal flames, but she will often endure emotional exile, criticism, dismissal. So, in order to survive, many women internalize the rules of their own erasure. They keep their shadow hidden, hoping that by being small, soft, and agreeable, they will be safe. But the shadow does not disappear when it is denied. It expresses itself indirectly, through anxiety, depression, self-sabotage, envy, passive aggression, or inexplicable emotional outbursts. A woman may find herself exhausted, not because she does too much, but because she constantly expends energy repressing parts of herself. She may become bitter or deeply insecure, sensing that something essential is missing, but unable to name it. Often, she projects her shadow onto others, criticizing in them what she has not allowed herself to embody. She may judge another woman's confidence as arrogance, her sexuality as vulgarity, her power as a threat. These projections are signs of a disowned self longing for reintegration. To begin reclaiming the shadow, a woman must confront the truths she has been taught to fear. Not in rebellion, but in deep inquiry. She must ask, what parts of me have I abandoned in order to be loved? What do I judge in others that I secretly crave to express? What have I labeled as bad that might actually be vital to my wholeness? This kind of work requires courage and humility. It means facing the internalized voices of shame, guilt, and fear without fleeing. It means allowing the uncomfortable feelings to surface and listening to what they reveal. For it is in the shadow that the most potent energies lie: the power to create, to speak, to lead, to desire, to protect, to say no, and to say yes with full authenticity. These energies, once reclaimed, do not make a woman monstrous. They make her whole. The feminine principle has long been misunderstood, reduced and distorted by cultures and ideologies that fear what they cannot control. While the outward image of femininity is often exalted, celebrated in art, beauty, motherhood, and grace, Its deeper archetypal reality is frequently ignored or mistranslated. The feminine is not merely a set of traits assigned to women, nor is it limited to gentleness, submission, or nurturing. It is a psychological force, a vast ancient energy that encompasses intuition, emotional depth, mystery, creation, destruction, and transformation. To misunderstand this force is to misread the soul of not just women, but of life itself. In many systems of thought, the feminine is equated with passivity, softness, and dependency, while activity, logic, and strength are aligned with the masculine. This dichotomy distorts both realities. True feminine energy is not weak or passive. It is the force that gestates new life, holds paradox, embraces chaos, and births change. It is found in the wildness of nature, the unpredictability of emotion, the womb of the unknown. However, society, fearing this depth and unpredictability, attempts to domesticate it. Women are taught to be good, to be pretty, to be kind, and most crucially, to be predictable. The deeper layers of the feminine, those that threaten control, are pushed aside. In doing so, women are not only misunderstood by others, but often disconnected from their own inner essence. This disconnection manifests in a loss of inner authority. When a woman does not trust her intuitive knowing, she becomes dependent on external validation and approval. She may seek constant advice, doubt her own decisions, or silence her inner voice because it does not match what she has been told is reasonable or appropriate. The suppression of the feminine principle leaves her navigating life with only half of her psyche engaged. She becomes over-identified with the rational, the linear, and the productive, neglecting the cyclic, the non-linear, and the receptive aspects of herself. This imbalance is not only exhausting, but alienating. It drives a wedge between her mind and her soul. Even more damaging is the societal fear of the feminine as chaos. In many myths and traditions, the feminine is symbolized by darkness, the moon, the ocean, all forces that are vast, deep, and beyond human control. Rather than honoring these symbols as sacred, they are often portrayed as threatening. A woman in touch with this aspect of herself is labeled too emotional, too intense, or irrational. Her dreams and visions are dismissed. Her power is seen as something to be managed or neutralized. Thus, the feminine becomes not a source of reverence, but of anxiety, even for the woman herself. This mistrust of the feminine principle does not only hurt women, it weakens the entire fabric of human consciousness. The world becomes dominated by doing, planning, and achieving, with little room for being, feeling, or simply knowing without proof. In women, this imbalance shows up as burnout, emotional numbness, and the haunting sense that something essential has gone missing. Many feel the ache of this absence but cannot name it, because they have never been shown what true feminine power looks or feels like. They only know the performance of femininity, the mask, the posture, not the raw, living energy that dwells beneath it. To restore connection to the true feminine principle, a woman must unlearn much of what she has been taught. She must enter the deep places within herself that have been deemed too much, too strange, too wild. She must listen to dreams, honor her cycles, and reclaim the wisdom that arises from feeling, sensing, and simply being. Only then can she begin to embody the fullness of the feminine, not as a role to play, but as a sacred, generative force that exists within her, waiting to be remembered. The myth of the good woman is one of the most pervasive psychological cages constructed in the collective psyche. It is not enforced with chains or violence, but with something far more insidious: internalized expectations, social conditioning, and subtle emotional rewards. From an early age, a woman learns that her value is closely tied to how well she conforms to a particular archetype: the selfless caregiver, the obedient daughter, the loyal partner, the nurturing mother, the modest achiever. These roles are not inherently negative. What makes them harmful is the way they are idealized to the exclusion of the woman's full humanity. She is rewarded when she plays the part and quietly punished when she does not. The message is clear: be good or be unworthy. This ideal of goodness becomes a lens through which many women view themselves. It tells them how they should feel, what they should desire, and how they should behave. A good woman is expected to put others first, to endure silently, to forgive endlessly, to sacrifice without complaint, and to never make others uncomfortable with her truth. She is told to be kind even when she is disrespected, to be quiet even when she has something important to say, and to smile even when her heart is breaking. In short, she is taught to disappear into the needs of others. Her own needs become a source of shame. This internalized ideal can create a deep psychological split. On the surface, a woman may seem composed, generous, even joyful, but beneath that surface, she may feel angry, exhausted, resentful, or numb. These emotions are rarely welcomed in the image of the good woman. They are seen as signs of failure, selfishness, or weakness. So they are pushed down, denied, and hidden away. This suppression does not make them go away. It only ensures that they emerge in distorted forms, in anxiety, depression, physical illness, or emotional outbursts that seem to come from nowhere. The more a woman tries to live up to this ideal, the more distant she becomes from her true self. The cruelty of the good woman myth lies in how it punishes deviation. A woman who sets boundaries is labeled cold or difficult. A woman who prioritizes her own dreams is seen as selfish. A woman who speaks with authority is called arrogant. These judgments are not just external. Over time, they become internal voices of self-doubt and self-criticism. A woman may censor herself before others ever get the chance. She may shrink her light to make others comfortable, or sabotage her own success out of unconscious guilt. She may crave freedom while simultaneously fearing the loneliness that can come with no longer fitting the mold. This psychological prison is maintained not just by men, but often by other women, mothers, friends, teachers, who themselves have inherited the same blueprint and passed it down, believing it to be the path to love, safety, and worth. Breaking free from the myth of the good woman is not about becoming the opposite, a rebel for the sake of rebellion. It is about becoming whole. It is about integrating the parts that have been denied: the assertive, the angry, the wild, the ambitious, the sensual, the unapologetic. It is about realizing that goodness is not the same as self-erasure, and that authenticity is not a threat to love, but the only foundation for it. When a woman begins to dismantle this myth, she often feels guilt and fear. She may wonder if she is becoming a worse person, but in truth, she is becoming a fuller person, one who no longer lives through the eyes of others, but from the core of her own being. The journey away from the good woman is not a rejection of care or kindness, it is a reclamation of choice. It is the decision to be real over being rivered, whole over being harmless. Silent suffering and self-betrayal are among the most widespread yet least acknowledged realities in the inner lives of women. These experiences often go unnoticed by others and even by the women themselves. because they are so deeply normalized. From an early age, many women learn to equate their value with how much they can endure, how quietly they can carry pain, and how well they can keep others comfortable even at the cost of their own emotional truth. This quiet endurance becomes a form of identity. To be strong means to not complain, to love means to tolerate, and to be worthy means to put others before oneself. Always. The most devastating consequence of this conditioning is not simply exhaustion or sadness, but the slow and subtle betrayal of the self. A woman begins to override her own instincts. She says yes when her body tightens with no. She remains silent when her spirit is screaming. She gives more than she has, believing that this is what makes her lovable or good. Over time, her inner compass, the intuitive knowing that should guide her, grows faint. It's not that she doesn't feel it, but that she's learned to distrust it. She second-guesses her desires, questions her reactions, and minimizes her own needs. This internal betrayal often masquerades as being agreeable, flexible, or selfless, but beneath the surface lies a quiet despair, the grief of having abandoned one's own truth. This suffering is particularly brutal because it often brings praise. The woman who sacrifices herself is seen as noble. The one who keeps the peace at her own expense is seen as mature. The one who continues to give, even when she's breaking, is seen as strong. These are not just social rewards, they are psychological chains. When suffering becomes a source of identity and affirmation, letting go of it can feel like losing oneself. The woman may not even realize how much she is hurting because she has never known another way to exist. Her pain becomes familiar, even sacred. She may carry it like a badge of honor, not recognizing that it is also the evidence of a life lived out of alignment with her own soul. Self-betrayal is not always dramatic. It can be found in small, daily decisions, staying in conversations that drain her, laughing at jokes that belittle her, tolerating relationships that erode her self-worth. It can be found in careers she did not choose, in silence she did not want, in choices made from fear rather than desire. It is the accumulation of these moments, seemingly small but psychologically massive, that leads to a life that feels hollow, disconnected, or quietly resentful. This is the burden of invisible pain. It is not recognized until it becomes unbearable. Many women reach a breaking point where they can no longer keep betraying themselves, even if they do not yet know how to live differently. This point can come through burnout, illness, depression, or a sudden confrontation with mortality. It may come quietly, through a moment of stillness, when she realizes she no longer recognizes the woman she has become. Or it may come with rage, not at others, but at herself, for all the times she said yes when she meant no, for all the times she disappeared to make others feel safe. The way out is not immediate and not easy. It involves confronting years, sometimes decades, of internalized beliefs and emotional patterns. It requires mourning the parts of herself that she abandoned and slowly learning to trust her own voice again. It calls for courage, not to become someone else, but to finally become herself. This is the quiet revolution that begins when a woman decides her own truth matters, even if it disappoints others. When she chooses to no longer equate love with self-denial, when she realizes that she was never meant to carry everyone else's comfort at the expense of her own, the act of reclaiming the self is not a loud declaration, but often a slow, trembling movement inward. It begins in silence, in the hushed spaces where a woman realizes she has spent too long living according to someone else's script. Reclamation does not always look like rebellion. More often, it is the quiet refusal to continue betraying one's inner truth, After years, sometimes a lifetime, of being shaped by roles, expectations, cultural archetypes, and internalized shame, a woman begins to ask, "Who am I when no one is watching?" This question does not demand an answer. It demands presence. To reclaim the self is to sit with this question patiently and honestly, and allow what has long been buried to rise. This process is rarely clean. It does not unfold like a journey from darkness to light, but rather like the slow integration of forgotten pieces. The wild, the intuitive, the angry, the sensual, the visionary. These are not foreign traits, but exiled parts of the self, waiting at the edge of consciousness to be remembered. Many of them were cast away because they threatened to disrupt the image of who a woman was supposed to be. Now, in the space of reclamation, they return with urgency, not to wreak havoc, but to restore wholeness. There is grief in this return, grief for the years lost to silence, grief for the truths never spoken, grief for the authentic self that was dismissed, ridiculed, or ignored, not only by others, but by the woman herself. This grief is not a sign of failure. It is the cost of waking up. It is the mourning that precedes rebirth. In reclaiming the self, a woman must often sit with uncomfortable truths. The friendships that were sustained by pretending, the relationships built on self-abandonment, the dreams delayed or denied because she believed she was not allowed to want more. These recognitions can feel like losses, but they are actually openings, portals to a deeper form of living. The path of self-reclamation does not follow logic or linear progress. It flows more like water, through memory, through body, through feeling. The intellect alone cannot guide this process. A woman must turn inward, listen to the body she was taught to mistrust, feel the emotions she was trained to suppress, and believe the voice she was conditioned to ignore. This is not about becoming someone new. It is about returning to the self that was never lost, only silenced. The more she listens, the more that voice grows. Not louder, but truer. It begins to direct her choices, not through fear or obligation, but through deep, embodied knowing. Reclamation also means learning to live with ambiguity. The self is not a fixed identity to be achieved, but a living process. A woman may find that she no longer fits into the boxes that once defined her: daughter, wife, mother, professional, caregiver. She may feel unrecognizable to those who knew her before. This is not a regression, it is a reconstitution. She is shedding identities that no longer serve, not out of rebellion, but out of fidelity to her own becoming. And this becoming does not seek approval. It does not need to be liked, understood, or celebrated. It needs only to be real. In a world that teaches women to be everything for everyone, reclaiming the self is a radical act. It is a return to one's own center, not as a place of isolation, but as the only true starting point for authentic connection, creativity, and contribution. The woman who reclaims herself is not selfish, she is sovereign. She no longer waits for permission. She no longer begs to be chosen. She knows now that the greatest love is not the one she earns by shrinking, but the one she gives to herself by finally expanding into everything she truly is. The brutal reality is not that women are weak, irrational, or broken, but that they have carried a world that refuses to see them whole. They have suffered in silence, made themselves small, and traded authenticity for acceptance. But the deeper truth is this: what has been forgotten can be remembered, and what has been suppressed can rise again. The journey of a woman returning to herself is not comfortable, but it is sacred. It is not loud, but it is powerful. And when a woman reclaims the parts of herself she was taught to shame, she becomes not just free, she becomes a force, not one made to be understood by all, but one that can no longer be denied by herself. In this return, she does not ask for permission, she simply becomes. And that, at last, is the most dangerous and beautiful thing of all.